The first rule of combat medicine was simple: don't become another casualty. Sergeant Thea Haldane had repeated it 100 times in her head, yet somehow she knew that rule wouldn't hold today. Thea stood in the medical tent at Forward Operating Base Shankridge, the canvas walls trembling under the rotor wash of a departing Black Hawk. Dust lifted off the ground like a ghostly veil, then vanished in the hard Afghan sun. Her trauma bag lay open on the steel table, every instrument cleaned, every tourniquet rolled, every ampoule of morphine accounted for. She'd done this 4 times this week alone. Outside, the base throbbed with life, armored trucks idling, mechanics yelling over engines, and boots crunching over gravel. But inside the tent, it was quiet until a voice broke through. Medics patch wounds. They don't fight wars. Lieutenant Marcus Parrish stood at the front of the briefing tent, his tone sharp enough to cut through the buzz of generators. He was 24, fresh from Ranger School, his uniform crisp, his arrogance newer than his rifle. The entire platoon turned to look at Thea standing in the back. She didn't react. Just kept her arms folded, eyes locked on the terrain map spread across the table. She'd heard the same words before, from men who had never been shot at, never had to hold a dying soldier's hand under fire. But what Parrish didn't know was that in less than 6 hours, she would drag his unconscious body through 80 meters of gunfire and pick up his M4 when the rest of the world fell apart. Thea finished packing her kit, tightening the straps until the canvas squeaked. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, each motion carved from muscle memory. Her sleeves were rolled tight, her name tape darkened with sweat. She had been in the army for 8 years, long enough to lose friends, patience, and the belief that rank always meant wisdom. That night, as the sun melted behind the mountains, she sat on an ammo crate outside the aid station. The air was thin, sharp. Somewhere to the west, artillery boomed like distant thunder. Thea stared into the dark horizon, her thoughts drifting to her brother Connor, who'd been killed by an IED when she was 16. He was the reason she wore the uniform, the reason she stayed when everything in her screamed to quit. She took out a worn photograph from her breast pocket. Connor, in dress blues, smiling with a look of quiet confidence. On the back, in faded ink, he'd written, "Do the job right, no matter the cost." Thea tucked the picture back and zipped her pocket. The hum of a generator filled the silence. Tomorrow's patrol would take them into the Tangi Corridor, a narrow valley where every rooftop could hide a muzzle flash. Intel said moderate enemy presence. Parrish dismissed it as light contact. Thea had learned to trust terrain more than reports. Before heading to her cot, she opened her trauma bag once more, checking every bandage, every syringe, every tourniquet again. A soldier's superstition. A medic's prayer. She whispered under her breath, "No one dies today." Outside, the night deepened. The wind carried the faint metallic clang of distant gates. Tomorrow would test everything she knew about duty and redefine what it meant to save a life under fire. If you're watching from anywhere around the world, drop your location in the comments. And if stories like this one move you, hit that red subscribe button now. It helps keep these untold stories alive. Thea felt the weight of her trauma bag press into her shoulders as the convoy rolled out from Forward Operating Base Shankridge. 4 armored trucks crawled across the dirt road toward the Tangi Corridor, their engines growling like beasts in a cage. The morning sun glared off the windshield, turning every shimmer of metal in the distance into potential threat. 16 soldiers. 1 platoon. 1 medic. Thea sat in the third vehicle, eyes fixed on the jagged mountains rising to the west. Inside the cabin, the smell of oil, sweat, and cordite mixed in the dry air. Lieutenant Parrish rode in the lead truck, his voice occasionally crackling through the radio. "Keep it tight, maintain spacing. We move fast and stay unpredictable." The words sounded good on paper. In real combat, they rarely worked. As they neared the first village, Thea adjusted her helmet strap, double-checking the placement of her trauma shears and 4-pouch. She always prepared as if the worst were coming. Because it usually was. The patrol dismounted at 0700. The streets were narrow, flanked by mud brick walls and shattered doorways. A few locals watched from rooftops, eyes blank, unreadable. Thea walked behind the platoon sergeant, scanning for signs of an ambush, loose dirt, wires, fresh footprints. Her heart beat steady. Measured. She'd trained for chaos. But even training couldn't silence instinct. Something in the air felt wrong. Too quiet. "Parrish," she whispered over comms, "we need to slow it down. Feels like we're walking into." The rest of her sentence vanished in a thunderclap of gunfire. Automatic weapons ripped through the silence. Dust and splinters filled the air as rounds slammed into the walls around them. The platoon scattered for cover. Thea dove behind a crumbling barrier, adrenaline flooding every nerve. "Contact front. Contact left," someone yelled. She could hear the lieutenant shouting commands, his voice barely cutting through the chaos. Thea scanned the alley ahead, counting the shapes moving through the haze. Enemy fire came from rooftops and windows. The sound was deafening. Then the radio call she dreaded most tore through her headset. "Man down. Lieutenant's hit." Her heart clenched. She pushed up to see Parrish lying 30 meters ahead in the open street, his leg twisted unnaturally, blood soaking through the fabric. He wasn't moving. "I've got him," Thea shouted, already sprinting. Rounds cracked past her helmet. The dirt exploded at her feet. She reached Parrish and dropped to her knees, dragging him by his vest handle. He was unconscious, his pulse weak, breaths shallow. "Stay with me, sir," she muttered, slapping on a tourniquet high above the wound. Blood soaked her gloves, but she twisted the windlass until the flow stopped. Another burst of fire shredded the wall inches from her head. She pulled harder, dragging him inch by inch across the dirt. 80 meters to the nearest cover. It might as well have been a mile. By the time she reached the wall, her lungs burned. She collapsed behind it, checked his airway again, and exhaled shakily. "Hang on, Lieutenant. I've got you." Through the radio came chaos, multiple wounded, enemy closing in, no air support yet. Thea pressed her back to the wall and drew one deep breath. The fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. Thea's hands trembled only once when she realized the bleeding had stopped. Everything after that was movement and instinct. She pressed the radio to her mouth. "This is Doc Haldane. I've got the lieutenant stabilized, but we're pinned. We need suppression fire now." "Copy that, Doc," came the gravelly voice of Sergeant Heller from the other end. "We're moving to your position." Rounds cracked overhead. The sound of machine guns thundered through the valley. Thea dragged Parrish behind a collapsed wall, shielding his head with her arm as concrete chips peppered her back. He groaned faintly, alive, but fading. She leaned close to his ear. "You're not dying here, sir." "Not on my watch." The platoon's M240s opened up from 2 rooftops. The thud-thud-thud of returning fire rattled through the narrow alleys. Thea risked a glance over the wall. She saw 3 enemy fighters moving down a side alley, closing in fast with AKs raised. Her rifle was out of reach. Parrish's M4 lay in the open street, 30 feet away, half buried in dust. "You can't go out there," her training screamed. "But if you don't, everyone dies." Thea gritted her teeth, pulled a smoke grenade from her pouch, and yanked the pin. Purple haze burst into the air, blooming between her and the advancing gunman. Using the cover, she lunged into the open, grabbed Parrish's rifle, and dove back just as bullets tore through the smoke. She slammed her back against the wall, heart hammering. The weight of the weapon felt strange in her hands. It wasn't her medical kit, but it was what she needed now. "This is Haldane," she said into the radio. "Taking defensive position at the choke point. Doc, stay down." Heller barked. But she was already moving. She took a knee behind the stone parapet at the alley's mouth, sighted through the M4's optic, and squeezed off 2 controlled bursts. The recoil kicked against her shoulder. One hostile dropped, then another. The third tried to rush forward, firing wild. Thea exhaled slowly and pressed the trigger once more. Silence. Her mind split between 2 worlds, half doctor, half soldier. She checked Parrish again, then looked up to see more movement down the alley. Reinforcements. 2 squads pushing east, someone yelled. She switched magazines. Only 2 left. Doesn't matter. Hold them off. Thea leaned around the corner, firing in short, rhythmic bursts. Each shot echoed across the valley walls, each second another heartbeat stolen from the enemy advance. Doc, we're regrouping. Heller's voice came again. 2 minutes out. Make it 1, she muttered, ducking as rounds chewed the stone beside her head. The heat of the rifle bit into her palms. Sweat traced lines through the dust on her cheeks. She counted every breath. Every shot. Every meter between her and survival. Then the call came again, closer now. Suppressing fire. Friendly tracers sliced through the haze, streaking red across the sky. The alley lit up with muzzle flashes as the platoon's gunners poured fire into the enemy line. Thea took the last shot in her magazine, dropping the final figure before slamming her back against the wall. Her arms shook from exhaustion, her chest heaving. Heller appeared beside her, panting, eyes wide. Jesus, Doc, you held the whole damn choke point? She gave a faint nod. Somebody had to. Behind her, Parrish stirred weakly, his face pale but alive. Thea looked at him, then back down the alley littered with shell casings and stillness. For the first time that day, the silence didn't sound like danger. It sounded like survival. The dust began to settle, carried away by the valley wind. For the first time in what felt like hours, there were no more gunshots, only the fading echo of engines in the distance and the slow hiss of cooling metal. Thea slumped against the wall, her body heavy with exhaustion. Her hands shook from adrenaline as she checked Parrish's pulse again. It was stronger now. Color had begun to return to his face. She smiled faintly. Welcome back, Lieutenant. You picked a hell of a place to take a nap. He tried to speak but managed only a rasp of air. His throat was dry, his eyes dazed. She pressed a canteen to his lips. Sip. You're going home, sir. Stay with me. Over comms, Sergeant Heller's voice broke through, strained but triumphant. All clear. We're loading the wounded. Doc, get ready, we've got a bird inbound. Thea nodded, already moving. She adjusted Parrish's tourniquet, covered the wound with fresh gauze, and hoisted his weight onto a stretcher with the help of another soldier. Together, they carried him toward the waiting MRAP. The battlefield looked unrecognizable now, spent shell casings glinting in the sun, shattered walls casting long shadows across the dirt. Thea climbed into the back of the armored vehicle, securing Parrish's four-line and airway as the driver shouted over the radio. Convoy rolling. Hang on. The vehicles lurched forward, bouncing hard over the uneven road. Every jolt sent a flash of pain through Thea's shoulders, but she stayed focused. She monitored his breathing, counting under her breath like a mantra. Outside, distant gunfire faded completely. The only sound now was the low growl of the engines. 2 hours later, at Forward Operating Base Shankridge, medevac crews loaded Parrish onto a waiting Black Hawk. Thea stood by as the rotors spun up, her uniform streaked with dust and blood. The helicopter lifted, whipping her hair across her face. She didn't wave. She just watched until it disappeared into the horizon. When she finally turned, Sergeant Heller was there, his face streaked with grime. Hell of a day, Doc, he said, half smiling. Didn't think you'd turn that choke point into a fortress. Thea's voice was quiet. Just did what had to be done. Months later, back at Shankridge, the battalion assembled on the parade ground under a pale dawn sky. Thea stood in formation, boots polished, uniform clean. Her heart pounded as the commander read the citation aloud, Silver Star for gallantry in action. She didn't hear every word. Her eyes drifted toward the crowd, where Lieutenant Parrish stood on crutches, still healing. Their eyes met for the first time since that day. He limped forward after the ceremony, stopping beside her. I was wrong, he said softly. About medics. About you. You were scared, she replied. That's human. He looked down, smiling faintly. You dragged me 80 meters through hell. I'll never forget that. Thea nodded. Just promise me something. Anything. Next time, when someone says medics don't fight, remind them who saved your life. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. Yeah. You've got my word. That night, Thea sat alone in the aid station, the same photo of her brother Connor resting beside a folded uniform. She placed the silver star beside it, the metal gleaming softly in the lamplight. Outside, the base was silent again. No gunfire, no orders, no chaos. Just the wind against the tent walls and the memory of 80 meters that changed everything. She whispered to herself, barely audible. Do the job right, no matter the cost. Then she closed her eyes, letting the silence finally feel like peace.